for CIA as the station chief or position for this particular European capital city because he was conversant in the language of that country and English and French. And so he was highly sought by CIA. And when we were finished, and he helped me build the gates to my mother's house, which again, nobody would, besides my late mother, would know who he was, because I don't even think he gave us a receipt when we paid him. But anyway, we went down and had lunch or an early dinner at a Chinese restaurant in Chatsworth. And when we went out to his car, he said, "I want to show you something." And he said, "Get in the car." And he reached behind his seat, or in the glove compartment, from the car, he pulled out an envelope. And he says, "I'm going to show you several images, and you may find them quite disturbing." And the one image that I remember he showed was of the object on Mars that in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, I named the grotesque, excuse me, I named the grotesque humanoid skull. This is one of the skull-like objects that are on the Martian surface, very similar to the one that I and Hunt walked out of on the Martian surface, but definitely a different object. And this skull is in my paper, and in fact, I showed some of the Martian humanoids, the more ET-looking Martians with the large heads and the spindly bodies, the rather bulbous heads that can be seen sort of recreating outside this skull. And he showed me, in other words, another detail from my paper. Just as my father had shown me the humanoid on Tsiolkovsky Ridge, there was apparently project continuity, at least within CIA, because now he's showing me another picture from my paper, the one of the other humanoids on the surface of Mars. And he said, "You may find this somewhat disturbing." And I said, "Well, what is this?" And he said, "These are ancient artifacts and life forms that in the future you're going to include in a landmark paper that you write about your discovery of life on Mars." And he didn't even give me the title, he just said that. And I said, "You're kidding me." And I said, "No." And I said, "When do I do this?" And he said, "I can't tell you." Now, at this point, I had already forgotten these Mars data points from childhood. In fact, in the late 90s, after all that college and graduate school and law school education, I wasn't even thinking about what I had done in childhood when I was attached to Pegasus. I wasn't even thinking of having gone up to Mars in 1982. This is already 16, actually, let me think, this is 97. This is 15 years later. 15 years later, I've gone from age 19 to 34. A lot had happened. I mean, so I said, "You're kidding me." And he said, "No, you're going to be writing a very important paper in which you show that Mars is inhabited." So, and he says, "But we want you to see these images, not necessarily so you remember them, but because we want you to take CAD/CAM training." In other words, he was instructing me on behalf of CIA to get schooling in computer-assisted design and computer-assisted manufacturing, basically computer-assisted drawing. Because he says, "We know that you use some kind of sophisticated extraction technology to take these as excerpts, to extract this data from NASA's own images from Mars, but we don't know how you do it, or we presently don't understand how you do it." Well, that was because the technical data in my paper involved several technologies, including the names of computers and computer programs and so forth, from 2008 that hadn't been invented yet. So here the CIA was concerned in the late 90s that I learn CAD so that I have the technical skills to extract data from NASA's photographs after I find life forms in them and artifacts and need to drop them into my paper. So this was a kind of, again, what I call quantum enfoldment. They were again working with a person of interest, making sure that he was briefed about something that the future would hold, so he would do it. In other words, they've been using quantum access for contingency planning as a channeling function, to channel things towards the outcomes that they want to make sure happen, or happen correctly. Like they want to, they've been going to our presidents to tell them, "Look, you're going to be destined to be president of the United States someday, and we want you to know that just so you can psychologically prepare for that." In a similar way, here they were trying to make sure that I took specialized schooling, so I learned CAD, so I could actually author the paper in the way that I did, because they were blithely assuming that by 2008 you couldn't do such work on your laptop. In fact, I did. All I did to drop the photographs into my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, was open the full resolution JPEGs of the original NASA rover Spirit photographs from NASA's archive page on the internet, open them in my paint program on my Hewlett-Packard Entertainment PC model 6700 DV, and simply use the cutting tool to take out small details of the photograph. I just basically used an extraction technology that anybody with an extra hour on a Saturday afternoon could teach themselves. I never did take CAD CAM. And by 11 years later, by 2008, you didn't need to. You could do that kind of stuff on your laptop. So those were the data points in my past regarding Mars and my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars. As I mentioned earlier in this interview, the paper is my work. It's my original work. I wasn't given the data by either my father or this liaison for the CIA. In fact, he told me that he never joined CIA. He'd been offered that station chief position when he was in graduate school earning his PhD, but he has a family and he decided not to join. But he did have friends at CIA. He had a contact to CIA through one of the professors in his department, and he had a longtime friend in Los Angeles who was a lieutenant commander with the Office of Naval Intelligence. So he became my liaison to the intelligence community in the late 90s when I began my research into Project Pegasus. So those were the Mars data points that were shared with me from age, 6 or 7 to 34. I mean, I'm trying to think of how many they were numbered. There were my dad came home with the intelligence file, and then there was the picture he showed me of the alien, the Martian when he was giving me the haircut, and then there was the Martians at Curtis Wright. There was Connie Chavez's statement when we were in Albuquerque on a project basis that she knew I would discover stuff on Mars. There was my dad giving me the paper, right? And then there was the teleporting up to Mars, and then there was this last briefing. So there were 7 briefings of one kind or the other that took place between 1968 or so and 1998 or so, during those 30 years, so that 11 years after the last briefing, they were as certain as they could be that when I got motivated in 2008 to study NASA's photographs, I would participate in the unfoldment of my own destiny and discover life on Mars. And so I think it's valuable to go back and narrate this as I have, kind of at length, because it not only shows how the quantum access capabilities that were developed into Project Pegasus in the early 70s under a DARPA-directed program were focused on Mars and the discovery of life on Mars there, but this also becomes somewhat of a kind of a seminar or a set-piece kind of lecture about how the U.S. intelligence community has been working with persons of interest like myself. In this case, they were making sure that my discovery of life on Mars happened. They helped me to let it happen. But I didn't do it for them, and the paper was written. I have the drafts of my paper. I was emailing them back and forth to Alfred Lambermont Weber, my colleague in exopolitics, when I was writing the paper and sharing my findings with him. So the paper was truly an original work and not something that had been passed along for me just to release to the public. But there were these 7 briefings, and now there's an historical record of what they were.
So if they know that, then why are you still being repressed?
Well, I'm not being repressed. I certainly could have been assassinated at any time in the 40 years since I was a 7-year-old on Project Pegasus.
Oh, for example, speaking and exopolitics and so forth.
Well, I just think that, like any great discovery, I'm being treated the way that Galileo Galilei and Nikolai Copernicus